number one cause of obesity is genetics.
Obesity is heritable, and we're conflating that with genetics, and that's a mistake.
All 8 billion of us are doing metabolism at all times. This show is about learning what metabolism is, how it affects you in every way possible, from mood and mental state to performance and energy. We are all about fine-tuning the human experience for you to achieve the best self you can be. And if you are someone who loves science, curious to know how your body works and how to optimize it, then you are in the right place. This is the H.V.M.N. podcast. In this episode, we have Marc Washington and Chris Damman. Marc Washington is the founder and CEO of SuperGut. His background spans a variety of consumer health businesses, including serving as president and COO of Beachbody, a $1 billion plus nutrition and fitness company with products including Shakeology Health Shakes, P90X, and the Beachbody on-demand digital platform. Marc was inspired by the memory of his late sister to found SuperGut to help people regain control of their health by harnessing the powerful science of the gut microbiome. Chris Damman is a clinical associate professor and practicing gastroenterologist at the University of Washington in the Department of Medicine, Division of Gastroenterology. He is former initiative lead of gut health in the enteric and diarrheal diseases team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and he holds an MD from Columbia University, an MA in molecular biology and biochemistry from Wesleyan University, and is board certified in gastroenterology. His research interests focused on food and microbiome therapeutics for non-communicable diseases. In this episode, we talked about everything gut health, the signaling properties of prebiotic on a DNA level, and the connection of dysregulation of gut health to chronic diseases. So please enjoy this episode and stay tuned. Hello, Chris and Marc. Welcome to the Health via Modern Nutrition podcast. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having us. Thanks, Latt. Nice to be here.
Nice to meet you. So let's get straight into it. I know, usually it's a bit complicated when we have like 3 people and, you have multiple people talking. Let's start with your introduction. Like, what are your backgrounds and what do you do?
Sure. I'll kick it off. So I'm Marc. I'm the founder and CEO of SuperGut. So I'm a consumer health, fitness and wellness enthusiast, executive, sort of turned entrepreneur. So started this company about 4 years ago. And we can get more into the background for why I started, but essentially really focused on gut health as a pathway to better overall health through food as medicine, really with the big, broad aspiration of improving public health, but still through enjoyable, tasty, but still science-backed food and nutrition. So I run the company.
Nice. Chris?
Perfect. Yeah. So Chris Damman, I am an advisor to medicine and science at the company, and I'm a gastroenterologist. I worked for 5 years at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and passionate about microbiome. I led the microbiome and gut health work there, and we were focusing on women and children in low and middle income countries, malnutrition, and recognize that malnutrition actually is this double burden. There's 2 sides to the coin, and there were equal parts over and under nutrition in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. I recognize we're kind of really trading one problem for the other, and that this is a problem that needs to be short-circuited right at home. Worked closely with Marc on the trial, the randomized placebo-controlled trial that the company sponsored and ran on one of their lead products.
Is it still ongoing, or
it's finished? Yeah, it's finished and published.
Amazing.
Yes.
Let's talk about the results. Let's what's the trial about? Like, what are the things that you were looking at, and what are the results?
Absolutely. So it was a 3-arm trial, 2-to-1-to-1 design of the SuperGut shake, which has active prebiotic fibers in it, versus a placebo shake that was missing those active fibers, and then a just dietary advice arm. So we provided advice across all 3 arms, but one arm where that was provided alone. It was a 3-month intervention, and shakes were provided up to 2 times a day, on average 1 to 1.5. And our primary endpoint was looking at a quality of life measure, well validated in diabetes specifically. Inclusion criteria were folks that had both diabetes and either overweight or obese. And we had a positive outcome with that quality of health measure. We're also very keen to look at hard measures like hemoglobin A1C and blood pressure and blood lipids. And hemoglobin A1C also improved significantly relative to placebo. And so we're quite interested to see that result. There's plenty of existing research in the literature that suggested that fiber would be impactful in that regard. This is maybe one of the larger and bigger trials, in a trial that looks specifically at a product that you can get as opposed to a supplement that might have just been in the research room.
And how did you measure the quality of life?
Yeah, so there's a score that's developed 10 plus years ago. It's a diabetes distress score. And it consists of 8 different questions, all relating to quality of life around diabetes. So, like, for example, how much does diabetes occupy your concerns and thoughts throughout the day? And it's a Likert type scale. So, on a scale from 1 to, whether it was 8 or 10.
I think it was 10. Yeah. So self-reported, yeah?
Self-recorded. And so then it takes the aggregate of all those questions, and that aggregate was significant. The trend in any one of those questions also was towards benefit relative to the placebo intervention.
So one, just to add to that, that metric, the rating, actually is a validated one, like in particular within the population around diabetes control. There was, though, in addition, a broader quality of life and overall wellness metrics that we did take as well, all of which also moved in a positive direction relative to one or both of the control groups. One of them, specifically a quality of life, was what was it called, Chris? The World Health Organization score. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but another sort of
WHO 5.
Yeah, exactly. Which also moved in a positive direction for those consuming the treatment arm, the SuperGut shake.
Amazing. And you also improve HbA1c. And for you guys who are listening and or watching the video, HbA1c is essentially glycated hemoglobin, which is a more stable form to measure if you have increased blood glucose, because blood glucose, if you measure it, it goes up and down depending on when you eat. Whereas if you have an overall higher blood glucose due to either insulin resistance or diabetes, you'll get your hemoglobin, meaning your red blood cells component, will get glycated because of the exposure to glucose, and that is stable for about 3 months. Great. So let's jump back to Marc. I'm very interested as to why you start SuperGut and all that, and then Chris, I'm gonna hold on to this question as to how does that study tell us differently about what we already know about fibers and prebiotics, because we do know that there are studies that showed lowering of HbA1c and blood markers for diabetics. But Marc, how did this company start and how did it come about? Tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for asking, Latt. Well, it was the way I like to describe it is this head meets heart moment. The head was just based on my background and my personal passion in this space of health and wellness, and working for very successful entrepreneurial companies, but typically as the right hand, and seeing both ways that you can build a health and wellness company effectively, but also there were things that I felt like we could do better and do differently, and one of which I felt like was an opportunity to take a more scientific-based approach to nutrition. So not just general better for you wellness and nutraceuticals, but how can we be truly functional food and address some of these problems which are only getting worse, right? And so I knew there was a need and an opportunity, right, from a business standpoint. But then why I decided to do this as an entrepreneur and start this company from scratch sort of later on in my career as an entrepreneur, it really is personal, right? And I think it's something consistent you see with a lot of entrepreneurs. It goes back for me, it was family. And so my inspiration was actually my little sister, Monica, who was a unbelievably colorful, vivacious personality. But unfortunately, like so many, she struggled with her health. And so she, was chronically, or clinically obese. Sorry. She lived with diabetes, she had high blood pressure. So lots of issues kind of with her in her adult life with her health. And she tried lots of diets and shakes, and she was on multiple medications, but nothing gave her control, right, over her health. Monica tragically passed away far too young. We actually just celebrated the 8th anniversary of her passing. And that lit a fire in me, the fact that something like that would happen in this day and age to my sister, and also the fact that so many others are dealing with some similar issues in terms of struggling to regain control of their health, and that there's just not great solutions that are accessible that people have to get in better control. And so that was sort of what fire built up in me over time, and why I decided to throw my hat in the ring and to start this company from scratch. And so taking this really deeply science-based approach to nutrition, but still combining that with something I know would have been important for Monica, making it incredibly accessible, right, and convenient. And dare I say, craveable, right? So this isn't just about, hold your nose and take your medicine. It doesn't work, right? I mean, I think you've probably seen through your time, right? I mean, to create real change, there's no magic pill. It needs to be a habit and something you repeat over and over again. I know it was important for Monica and important for so many others. And so that's sort of the essence that we try to create in building SuperGut, is taking this deep commitment to an evidence base. Obviously, we focus on the gut microbiome as our pathway, but combining that with an intensely consumer-focused food company, right, that creates delicious products that just happen to be incredibly healthful and can, frankly, be transformative to health. So that's kind of how I, came about creating this business.
Great. So, that's such a touching story, first of all, and sorry to hear about your sister. And secondly, how did you translate the science into what you have right now? Like, where did you even begin? Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure a lot of people always wonder how these nutraceuticals, how these nutrition companies come about. When does the science come first and intention comes first? Is it the vision first? How does that work?
Yeah, no, it's a real good question. I will say the starting point was the vision, right? The intention. The next point was the science. And then the third point was the productization, the consumerization of it, right? And so I shared the vision, the inspiration. The next step really was the science, right? And so my very first hire was a PhD food scientist, Ren, who had worked for me previously at Beachbody on my R&D team, where we literally dove into the science, into the evidence base around gut health broadly, but specific prebiotics in particular, the unique, very powerful, but really tolerable class of prebiotics that we use in SuperGut called resistant starch. And honing in on the science, both seeing how this works, what are the different sources at what levels and concentration, et cetera, to really get a sense for how we can create a really efficacious products and what we can combine. Well, the other different types of prebiotics that we can combine with resistant starch. So that really was the foundation. But fortunately, having a background in the space, as did, a head of product, we're able to then create a working prototype called an MVP within a couple months, right? We had a working functional shake. We spent then the third step, literally the next year, to productize, to commercialize, to actually make this a product that people would know and love. The first version, it worked. It was functional. We tested it on ourselves. It tasted awful. It was gritty. It was like one of those that nobody would consume as a habit. And that's literally what took us the longest amount of time, is iterating, trying it out, working with flavor experts, doing consumer sensory panels, et cetera, to get to that point of this is a delicious shake that someone would have, even if it wasn't incredibly functional. That was the point at which you're like, okay, we're ready to release this to the world. So that was the order that we went.
Now, without giving away too much, what is within the SuperGut shake? Is it just prebiotics, or is there something else in there, vitamins or minerals? What is in there?
Yeah, so the foundation for SuperGut, and frankly across all of our products, so we have shakes and we have bars, and we actually have our prebiotic mix as well. The foundation really is this prebiotic resistant starch fiber mix, right? And we're very open about this. We actually want more people to understand, one, the importance of gut health, but specifically prebiotics and the different types of prebiotics that you need to try to get more of in your diet. And so we created our own proprietary and now actually patented blend, including a couple different plant-based sources of resistant starch, this powerful prebiotic, but combined with other prebiotics as well, like based in the literature that have a synergistic effect. So one is called oat beta-glucan, which is another form of a prebiotic that we incorporated into our unique blend. And we've seen this combination. It's not only effective, similar to some of the existing evidence, but we actually saw there's a multiplier effect. There's a synergistic effect of our blend that we created together. That's actually what allowed us to patent, right, this blend. And so then, once we finalize the blend, that's what we then go and productize. And we put into our shakes. That's the same blend we put into our bars. And now we actually sell that prebiotic blend as a powder that you can just add to anything, right, to make any food or particular beverage a gut healthier version of that beverage.
Right. And all these components, essentially people can also get it separately. Am I correct? But
yeah,
you guys are providing the convenience of having it in one shake that tastes good.
Absolutely. And the other thing to point to that is, and we are always, and Chris will reinforce this, very much focused on being complementary to everything else that you're doing in your life, in your health. We're not trying to replace a plant-forward whole food diet. Like, that's super important. But you know what? It's really, really hard to get all of the nutrients that you need on a consistent daily basis with, the modern Western diet. And the stats show almost none of us get even the minimum amount of fiber, right, in our diet. And so we're trying to make it significantly easier, tastier, more convenient to fill in that gap. So even if you're, following a healthy whole food diet, it's still hard to get it. So we have very concentrated dosage levels, and then obviously put in convenient, accessible formats as well to fill in that, that fiber gap and to help reintroduce these nutrients back into people's diets.
Yeah, absolutely. I work for a nutrition company, so I'm always very skeptical when people mention, this is a patented technology, and I want to make sure that it is something that people can still get, but you are essentially providing it in a much more convenient way.
Exactly.
So
this is nature, right? I mean, this is every single item is from nature. This is all plant-based. This is all grass. So generally recognized as safe elements. It's just, how do you find the highest quality, highest concentration, combination of them? That's kind of what we patented. Is a Mother Nature has got it figured out. We're just making it easier.
Scientists, when you hear, right, this is, the only thing that can fix it. And we can talk about how people market Ozempic and Wegovy and all of that, being the magical miracle drug that can solve all the issues without having to think about the other factors of
diet,
lifestyle and diet. Exactly. We can talk about that in a bit. Chris, I'm going to come to you. Given that this product has a lot of fibers and prebiotics taken from plants, what do you think, in your expertise, happens to the gut of a person who goes through carnivore diet, for example? Is that really bad, or is that, some way or another they manage to get their fiber somewhere, or would that be really very detrimental?
Yeah, so I'm a believer in personalization, and people are passionate about the diets that they follow. They're diatribes for diatribes, so because they've gone through a process of trial and error and found something that works for them. So folks that have found keto to work for them, that's wonderful. Folks that have found a Mediterranean diet, that's wonderful. Vegan, vegetarian, and even extremes like carnivore. Now, that said, there also, I think, is data at an epidemiological level and at an interventional level that supports, generally speaking, the health of a largely plant-based diet with supplement from animal source foods. That's at a population level. That's at an epidemiological level. For each individual, it's very different, because somebody might have a health condition where giving, any sort of fiber is going to inflame things because of the specific bacteria that are present in their gut. And that's a really, really important distinction to make, personal medicine versus public health generalized approaches. So when I speak in terms of public health and generalized approaches, not each individual who might have these specific conditions, I lean towards the sort of the Michael Pollan way of eating, and that's eat food, mostly plants, not too much. And the reason is plants are just filled with all these bioactive compounds that we've evolved lock and step with. Fiber is one of them, polyphenols, certain types of fats like omega-3s, other functional fats, and even things like fermentation products, like butyrate. These are really important for our gut. And truth be told, you mentioned Ozempic and Wegovy. These are, and taking the weight loss fields, diabetes field, metabolic field at large by storm, some ways controversial storm. And don't get me wrong, they're incredibly powerful and very valuable from a medical standpoint. But the reason why I think they're so powerful is they're really just tapping into something very fundamental in our human biology and gut health, and that is these gut hormones, GLP-1, GIP, PYY, that are made by our own guts endogenously, naturally, and quite frankly, stimulated by things that are present in food, and things that in part have been processed out of food. And this is probably one of the major reasons that we're in this metabolic predicament, is we're not invoking these natural gut hormones that tap into this ileocolonic brake mechanism that tell our brains, tell our stomachs, tell our metabolic organs that we're full, or we have this load of sugar that needs to be processed.
And just for the clarity of our audience as well, could you just elaborate a little bit more on what GLP is, what PYY, what do they do, just so that people have more contextual understanding around?
So the gut is as much an organ for absorbing all those nutrients as it is an organ for sensing those nutrients and telling the rest of the body in this like maestro way, almost like a symphony, right? An orchestra, how those nutrients should be metabolized and processed, incorporated in our cells. And one of the ways it does that is it makes hormones. And GLP-1, GIP, PYY, these are just hormones that the gut makes that can have effects right on the gut, but also get absorbed into our blood and have effects very far from the gut, like in our brain and our pancreas, our livers, muscles, fat cells. So they're kind of like, I don't know, maybe like the score that the maestro is conducting in the symphony, telling the violins and the violas what to do, so to speak. And, just like insulin is dysregulated in diabetes, these hormones are dysregulated as a result of the processed foods that we eat and the fiber that the polyphenols are taken out. So, yeah, they're kind of these master regulators that the gut is making. The gut is a master regulator in general of the rest of the body and how it metabolizes food.
And to connect those dots, like some of those breakthrough drugs that you mentioned, so the Ozempic and Wegovy, they're tapping into this mechanism that Chris is talking about, but in a highly concentrated dosage, right? And so when you talk about those drugs, in large part, they are based on a concentrated dosage of those hormones, but then, injections right into your stream to supplement the fact that your body isn't, eating our bodies what it needs to produce them naturally and regulate the symphony that Chris had described. And so that's what these drugs are, and it's obviously expensive. They're very powerful, but it's tapping into some things that your body is naturally meant to do on its own. And the other thing is, obviously, as with any powerful drug, it's going to have side effects, and it also doesn't overcome the need for healthy habits and behavior, right? And so if you stop taking the drugs, but you haven't changed your healthy habits or behavior, the science has shown you're likely to revert back to some form of your former self. So it really does come back to, how are you treating your body? How are you feeding your body? on a consistent, ongoing basis from a habit creation. So nutrition still reigns supreme despite sort of these unbelievably powerful breakthrough new drugs.
Absolutely. I mean, I made a commentary video on the CBS 60 Minutes when they claim that obesity, the number one cause of obesity is genetics, and that, you need to go to Ozempic to solve that problem. But then in that video, they also said, once you're on the drug, you're on the drug for the rest of your life, but you also have to maintain good exercise and nutrition. So they did mention that. So I pointed that out. And then the doctors that they interviewed were also advisors for Novo Nordisk, which is a pharmaceutical company that sponsors the broadcast as well. So there's a huge conflict of interest in all of that. So for those of you who are interested, you can go and watch the video on YouTube that I made.
You just struck a chord in mentioning that obesity is genetic. And I have a thought here that I think is important to interject. And that is, obesity is heritable. And we're conflating that with genetics. And that's a mistake. Because heritability involves more than just genetics. It involves inheritance of our mother's gut microbiome. It involves epigenetic factors that are a result of in utero development and even development of gametocytes before mother and father. And is a function of shared environmental factors in addition to the genetics. So
exactly, inheriting the cultural practices, the health and lifestyle practices, the way you eat, how often you eat, what you eat,
environment.
So the reason this distinction is so important is if we resign ourselves to things being genetic, then the motivation for all the lifestyle factors disappear. And I think that's a huge disservice. If we recognize, yes, it's heritable, and all these other things are contributing, these other things are modifiable. They're modifiable on an individual life basis. They're modifiable in an intergenerational basis as well. And the way that you modify them is through lifestyle factors like food, like exercise, like mindfulness, and like our microbes.
Yeah, no, Dr. Ben Bikman and I, on one of our episodes, we talked about this specifically, and his research on insulin resistance and obesity, looking at, genetics and looking at different factors. And none of us scientists, I don't think any of us, deny the fact that genetics have a role to play when it comes to the pathophysiology of obesity and diabetes and all of that. But to say that genetics is the number one factor and therefore there is nothing you can do about you progressing in the disease phase, then it's like you said, it's doing a disservice on what people can actually do and change to their lives. Now, as we're talking about pathophysiology and disease progression, let's dive deeper into the role of microbiome in the progression of obesity and diabetes and non-communicable diseases and chronic diseases. Let's talk about that. What do you know so far about how does the microbiome, in terms of mechanism of action, cause these chronic diseases?
Yeah. So it's super complex, and there's many different pathways and mechanisms at play. And we touched on one of those mechanisms. Those are the gut hormones. If you trace things back just a little bit, what stimulates the gut hormones in a more specific way, it's short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. And butyrate or the short-chain fatty acids and butyrate, they're metabolites of the microbes. Microbes chew on things like fiber, turn it into the short-chain fatty acids, and then those stimulate the gut hormones, and all those effects that I mentioned happen. Now, of course, it's not just fiber and short-chain fatty acids. It's polyphenols doing things too. It's the bioactive fats. And in fact, the microbiome is taking those things too and making them A, more bioavailable, like the polyphenols, or B, modifying even fats as well, and making them more bioactive in certain ways. So the microbiome is really a key linchpin in that bioactive translation, making the foods that we eat able to say what they need to say, kind of almost like nature's natural packaging or instructions to the rest of the body. Now, butyrate. Let's go back to butyrate. Butyrate is such a important molecule. It's the darling of the microbiome in terms of the bioactives that the microbiome is creating. And one of the things that it does is makes those gut hormones. Okay, that's super important. But what's less appreciated is it has direct impact after being absorbed into the body as well. And direct impact even in the brain and parts of the body that are super far from the gut. How does it do this? Well, it's a very potent molecule. So even at, nanomolar, micromolar, like 1-2 micromolar quantities, it can stimulate something called HDAC. HDAC is a master epigenetic regulator. It's actually, sirtuins fall into this master category of histone deacetylase inhibitors. So when we're talking about polyphenols going through a sirtuin pathway, this is analogous to that. It's just butyrate going through an HDAC pathway. And what's critical here is it regulates things at an epigenetic level. So masterfully turns on and off key regulatory pathways in metabolism, telling ourselves, not ourselves, ourselves too. Is it time to metabolize or not? Is it time to be inflamed or not? But also turning on and off our key energy powerhouses, our mitochondria, through some of the canonical master pathways for mitochondria. So we're talking about epigenetics, we're talking about mitochondria, we're talking about gut hormones, and butyrate, which is related to hydroxybutyrate.
I was about to say.
Which I know is one of your favorites. It's right there.
Yeah.
So we can go down that pathway.
Yeah. So for those of you who do not know what butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid. It's a fatty acid with 4 carbon, forming just a short form of fatty acids that, like Chris said, being used by the microbiome for a lot of these functions. But as we know, the main ketone body that is used for metabolism is beta-hydroxybutyrate. So can you talk a bit on how that is related to the butyrate fatty acid, and do they have similar function? Because I know for a fact that beta-hydroxybutyrate also works as a HDAC inhibitor as well, and it has sort of transcriptional effect on the cell by directly interacting with the nucleus, with the DNA via beta-hydroxybutyrylation. So can you talk a bit on the relationship between butyrate and hydroxybutyrate?
Yeah, absolutely. So just in their very name, they sound similar. Well, that's not enough. And you describe the molecular structure, it's the difference of a hydroxyl group. And that can be significant, right? That can determine whether or not that lock and key function is relevant or not. And truth be told, there have been elegant reductionist studies looking at one versus the other, and, cell culture studies and things like that, Keiko-2 cells, and have shown that to a certain extent, they do stimulate the same pathways. Turns out, actually, though, butyrate tends to stimulate HDAC in a more potent way, almost a log more. And that actually correlates well with what we see physiologically within the blood. When we have a meal that's rich in fiber, it makes it down into the colon. The amount of butyrate that actually goes into our blood is at about the right KD level to stimulate HDAC. Similarly, if we're fasting and we hit a ketotic state, it's an order of magnitude or 2 higher of hydroxybutyrate, and yet probably stimulating the exact same pathways, regulating our metabolism in a very similar way, just being stimulated in a different way as a result of not eating as opposed to eating foods that are high in carbohydrates and have all this fiber in it.
I get to interview all these doctors, scientists, and cool people in this health and fitness industry, all made possible because of this podcast that is funded by the company I work for, which is Health via Modern Nutrition, or H.V.M.N. And it is not that they pay me to do this, but I genuinely love and believe in the product Ketone-IQ. I use it every day before my podcast, before my workout, or even after my workout for recovery. There hasn't been a single supplement that can give me such a drastic change in subjective feel within minutes as much as Ketone-IQ has. For those of you who do not know me, I'm from Malaysia, I got my PhD from the UK, and my passion is in science and chronic diseases, and I believe it is all about transparency, scientific integrity, and about sharing with everyone so that everyone can benefit from it. And if you like this content and our work, please do support us by liking, leaving a review, or sharing with your friends and families, or even buying a shot of Ketone-IQ at any Sprouts nationwide in the US, and the first shot is on us. Just scan the QR code and you'll get your money back for your first shot. You can also use the code H.V.M.N.POD20, that is H.V.M.N.POD20, and get 20% off your first purchase at the H.V.M.N. website. Do you know if hydroxybutyrate and butyrate are interconvertible to one another, or are they completely separate in our system?
Yeah. Oh, you mean in terms of can they be metabolized from one to the other?
Yeah. Like you know how beta-hydroxybutyrate is in equilibrium with acetoacetate, for example, and then that determines acetone and acetyl-CoA sort of concentrations. Does butyrate come into, I mean, this is getting really deep into the biochemistry, but does this butyrate and hydroxybutyrate involve in any reversible conversion?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to be honest, I don't know the answer. But every good podcast ends in a Google search frenzy for me. So that will be what will happen afterwards.
Yeah, same here. I would definitely look up on it as well, because it seems to me it's literally just removing the hydroxyl group, and there you get a butyrate already. And we know there are a lot of enzymes in the body that can do that. So it'll be surprising to say that they don't relate to each other at all. But we'll see once we Google it or ChatGPT it. So we talked a lot about prebiotics, right? We talk about fiber, and let's talk a little bit on the probiotics. So what I've learned with the limited knowledge that I have on microbiome is that when you provide a diverse probiotic profile to your gut and your microbiome, you are also encouraging a huge diversity of different microbes in your gut, and therefore that diversity is what a lot of gut experts trying to promote, and that's what's needed for good health. Is that true, first of all? And second of all, is there some, because I know some companies, they have like different strains of probiotics that they are patented, and they say like, this is good for you. That's introducing a different strain. Like, is that necessary, or do we have all the ingredients we need, and all we need is to have the right environment to then grow this different strains of microbes?
So in terms of diversity, it depends on the ecosystem, the system, and it's not categorically true. So, for example, in the infant gut, what has been more associated with health is a bifidobacterium predominant gut ecosystem. Now, you could argue that within that bifido genus, there's many species and many, many different strains, and so you still have metabolic diversity there. So it kind of depends on where you put that.
The scale. Right.
The scale. Yeah.
I guess my question is for my audience. Is it bad if they stick with one diet every day, all day, every day, day in, day out for a long time, i.e. not creating that diversity? Is that, just for a takeaway point here?
Yeah. What you feed your microbiome is what it becomes. And so if you feed a non-diverse diet to your microbiome, it won't be diverse. Is that a bad thing? If it's not diverse in a good way, it's not a terrible thing. But it also has implications on resilience. So if you're having a diverse diet, your microbiome is going to be more resilient because there's going to be that metabolic capacity for many different things that you're eating. And let's say one day you can't eat a certain thing, eat another thing. All that capacity is still there in order to harness the bioactive components that are present. And truthfully, there's these one-to-one relationships that exist between the primary degraders of fiber and the specific types of fibers. Not so much on the back end with the secondary degraders, but those primary degraders are very specialized, and eating a diverse diet will make sure that you have a diversity of those species there.
So now let's talk a little bit about your second question, and I'll chime in here just around the ways to create a healthy gut, whether it's through more diversity or just having the right microbes. And, a lot of the historical focus when it comes to gut health has been on more the probiotic side, right? Which is intended to add more, good bugs, right, to your gut.
You get yogurt and all these fermented products.
Yes. And there's some compelling science, and Chris can speak to it, around specific strains or around specific sources, in particular fermentable foods that have, health benefits. I'd say where there's still a lot to be proven is just how effective many of the store-bought, over-the-counter, single strain or what have you probiotics are in terms of functionally impacting your gut and impacting your overall health. Right? If you think about it, it's quite a journey, right, that it needs to go through. It needs to be, generally speaking, needs to be the right strain, the right quantity, needs to be alive, needs to survive a very harsh digestive process, right, because your gut, your body's made to break things down, right, and to actually make it to your gut to actually have some effect. And that's a long process, and not all. I know that there's been, research around a lot of over-the-counter, commercially available probiotics that aren't necessarily making it all the way there. And there are very few that have actually done that and gone out and actually proven, right, through data, through evidence, that not only is it surviving, but it's serving a function and it's leading to a health outcome. And right, so that's where the skeptic in me, does speak up a little bit in terms of, should you be, relying on a probiotic to kind of really build gut health and your overall health? And I would just say, go back to the data. And right. And so if you have found one that has good evidence behind it, that it is the right probiotic for you in the right form and that specific clinical data, go for it. I think there's few and far between on the probiotic side relative to, we already have hundreds of trillions of microbes in your gut. Like the wiring is there, right? I mean, I think we have the opportunity to nourish your gut, in the right direction and path. And that's where prebiotics come in, right? By definition, resist digestion to feed the beneficial bugs in your gut. And that's obviously where we focus on as a business is, it's within you, right? Let's give your body, your gut, the nutrients it needs to flourish and to thrive. So, Chris, anything else to chime in on that?
Well put. I generally say if you feed them, they will come. Alluding to Kevin Costner's Field of Dreams from the 1980s or 90s. It's not completely true, and it goes back to this distinction between public health and, an individual. And some individuals just have this depleted, bleached coral reef of a gut. You can, capture that vivid image, and you can give as much fiber, prebiotic as you want, and that diversity isn't going to bounce back. And their next generation approaches, not probiotics like over the counter, but these so-called live bacterial products, LBPs, are probably going to be the approach in combination with the prebiotics, and that's, I think, where these next generation approaches
and do transplants as well,
things like that. Yeah, and there's companies that are doing stuff there too. Yeah.
So I know the awareness and education around microbiome and gut health has really taken off in the past, few years or so. When people take a supplement like yours, like SuperGut, like prebiotics, what's the actual timeline that people have to be aware of before they see an improvement of any symptoms or any improvement in health? Because I think with a lot of supplements and nutrition products is that you don't see the improvement right away, right? You need to let your body adapt to it. But at the same time, it's like, how long do I wait? But then if it's gradual, I may not even notice it. So what is your take on prebiotic products?
Yeah, so I'll start with this. And I think that is one of the challenges, I'd say, in food broadly, nutraceuticals specifically. Not only many times you not feel it right away, it's a question whether you ever will feel, right? It's a lot based on a belief system that this is supposed to be good for me, so I'm going to take it, and just believing that it's going to work. I think there's a fundamental difference with, our approach at SuperGut and the prebiotic blend that we have. I will still say it does depend, right? Back on the individual basis, kind of over what time period and how this shows up for you as an individual. Somewhat depends on your starting point and where sort of your system is out of balance. Some general themes, though, we know from the research and from, real-world evidence, some of the right-away feelability associated with SuperGut products are, one, given that it's high in fiber and it's slowly digested, a couple of things that people generally feel right away. One is a feeling of satisfaction, of fullness, right? Of not having as many cravings or not being as hungry when they consume a shake or when they consume a bar relative to your typical bar, because that fiber is very slowly digested. So it definitely does impact your feelings of satiation, right? So that's like a right away type thing. Another factor which tends to happen pretty early on is because of that, slow absorption, it also is our products, especially which don't have any added sugar, avoid blood sugar spikes and crashes, right? And so it actually helps maintain your blood sugar in a very healthy, stable range. And you can actually feel that, right? And so that affects your feelings of fullness, but also impacts your energy levels. It helps you avoid crashes and things associated with that, like brain fog, where you get, an immediate spike of sugar and then a crash and you're feeling, woozy and hangry thereafter. Like those feelings can go away, where you can feel steady, stable energy, right, when you consume a SuperGut.
How much calories is there for a SuperGut shake?
Yeah, so a shake is in the 180 calories range. Pretty similar for our bars as well.
So it's very similar to protein shakes as well.
Yeah, exactly. But dissimilar from a protein shake is that we've got, call it, 15 to 20 grams of fiber, right, in the shake versus typically 2 to 3, right? And so those are some of the things most people feel right away. And I'd say, depending on your system, there's other things that you can feel pretty soon as well. Like typically, this is working through your gut, and this does get your digestive system going. And so this actually helps a lot of people, especially if they have irregular sort of digestive habits. So whether they're feeling constipated or have diarrhea or bloating or what have you, like for many people, it actually helps regulate that to bring it into more of a regulated digestive path. So it helps improve regularity or reduce bloating, if those are things that you are dealing with. And those can happen within days to weeks. And then typically the kind of improvements that Chris described from the more metabolic health improvements, those things take time, right? Those things don't happen overnight in days or weeks. Especially if you're someone struggling with, a metabolic syndrome, so like overweight or obese, or, elevated blood sugar levels, those are the kind of things that you could expect to see a result from over a couple months' time, right? Call it 3 months. And that's just like what we saw in our clinical study with a consistent habit over time. Not only are you getting the acute and immediate effect, but there's more of a chronic improvement through some of the gut microbiome mechanisms like Chris talked about that can show up in improved average blood sugar levels, HbA1c, kind of improve sort of weight management, can improve blood pressure, those kind of metabolic health results like what we saw in our clinical.
That's great explanation. Thank you very much, Marc. And in terms of artificial sweeteners, what sweeteners do you guys use for the shake?
Yeah, so one of the things that I was really clear about and had a strong belief is, I think one of the leading issues associated with health, one of the key drivers, is just how much sugar and simple carbs we are consuming in our diet. And so I had a very high bar for zero added sugar across any of the products that we have.
We speak the same language here in H.V.M.N as well.
I figured as much. And so therefore, but we still need to make it delicious products, right? And so you have to find some ways to sweeten it. For us, we use all natural forms of sweetener. It's actually a combination of allulose, a non-GMO sweetener that has similar properties and taste to sugar. You're probably familiar with it, but obviously it's very low calorie, very low glycemic impact from allulose. We also combine that with a what's called H.V.M.N, a part of the stevia plant, but less of the metallic aftertaste as traditional stevia. We found like that right combination in combination with our fibers and our flavor system gives you this, this nice level of sweetness. Again, all natural, but in a way that's not going to spike your blood sugar. So those are the primary sweeteners that we use in our.
Yeah, I just want to make sure whether or not you're using erythritol, given the recent study that came out on cardiovascular risk and
I can't speak to that because I will say in our bars, so the one challenge that we found was we even in the coatings of our bars, we're like no sugar. It's almost unheard of, right? And so we're like, okay, we have to find some forms. And the only forms available do have some sugar alcohols in them. So we do have one of our bars, I think it's one or two of our bars does have a small amount of erythritol as the sugar alcohol that's in the coating. Obviously, there's some new studies the study that you're referring to that came out. I think there's some questions about it. There's also good evidence on the other side that shows, some potential positive health benefits of erythritol as well. But yeah, one of our bars, I think, had 2 to 3 grams.
Yeah, and I also broke down the protocol of the study. They basically took 30 grams of erythritol within 2 minutes in the drink, in a 500 ml drink. And then they measured erythritol in the body. It sort of stays in for 48 hours. So basically, can you have as much erythritol as 30 grams within 48 hours? And therefore, that increases the risk. So, whenever we look at a paper, we often have to dissect them in terms of what is the actual protocol, and rather than just saying, oh, this is bad, this is good, this
exactly.
is bad.
We're
there's another
looking at the headline. And
absolutely.
Running with it.
And I could say, people on TikTok, the comments are hilarious. They'll be like, not me watching this video while chewing 30 chewing gums at the same time. It's a learning how to do TikTok content is definitely a journey for me.
That's a whole other podcast to talk to.
Yes. All right. So we talked about the product. We talked about the content. Let's talk about use case, right? And this is probably going to be related to the clinical study that Chris runs as well. So first of all, how often do they take it? Second of all, when do they take it? Do they take it before, after meal, or, fasted? And then third is, do they take into account the calories, or are they just given ad libitum meal and then they just decide when they eat, when they're hungry?
So I'll start from a consumer standpoint, and then Chris, maybe you can chime in and talk about the approach from the clinical side. From a consumer standpoint, one of the biggest aspects of our ethos is we're trying to make it easier to get these missing nutrients back into your diet on a consistent basis. So one of the things that we preach is, regardless of which sort of SuperGut product you consume, regardless of how much, the best thing you can do is to make it a daily habit, right? Is to try to get these nutrients into your diet on as consistent a basis as possible. And so we try to get people to make that a daily habit, whether you have a shake or a bar or our prebiotic mix. We try to really try to get these nutrients into your diet on a daily basis. Obviously, we want to support you. You need to be doing it through whole foods as well, but we know, that you should be getting on average, call it 30 grams of fiber a day in your diet. Average US adult gets 15. Right? So there's a big fiber gap for almost all of us. And so we're trying to make it easier to fill that fiber gap with the SuperGut products. And I think that's more important than, which product it is, or frankly, the time of day that you consume it. The main thing that we say is, when does it work for you? In your schedule, in your lifestyle. There are some nuances in terms of, what impact it might have on your postprandial blood sugar if you have it, before the meal or at the beginning part of a meal, can help, offset some of the blood sugar spike of some of the other aspects. But from an overall standpoint, from a lifestyle standpoint, consistency as close to daily as possible is the main thing that we drive people.
Yeah. In terms of the clinical study, it was 1 to 2 times a day, and it was replacing at least one meal. The second shake could be replacing a meal or a snack. from the standpoint of advising individuals, I usually will say fiber is meant to be in the context of food and a meal. And so for the fiber blend in particular, which doesn't come packaged with nutrients, that is best taken with a meal, like shortly before or during a meal, because there it's going to have the greatest impact metabolically by decreasing your blood sugar after your meal. What's really interesting is there's almost like two stages to the effect of fiber. There's that immediate effect on your blood sugar right after a meal because it slows the absorption. That's the first meal. Now let's say you have another meal after that and it doesn't have any fiber in it. You're still going to have an effect of that first meal. And the reason is that first meal makes its way down into your lower intestine where all those microbes are. Microbes make butyrate. Butyrate stimulates the gut hormones, and those gut hormones then circle back and impact how that blood glucose is being absorbed. So you see a very similar effect of a lower blood sugar spike, even with a second meal, but by a very different mechanism. That's more of the microbiome mechanism.
Interesting. So generally, taking it earlier on in the day with a meal is definitely better than to have a prolonged effect for the second meal. So this is super interesting.
I guess you could interpret it that way. But I also really like what Marc said. If you could just get it in your diet, whichever works best for you. A lot of people do it in the morning, though.
Yeah, that's true. I would say, most people, in particular for the shakes, many, and myself included, will have one as your breakfast, right? And I typically, when I'm looking for a snack, it's the afternoon, right? That gap between lunch and where I need some energy, I need some nutrition. That's usually when I will have a bar, right? I mean, so that's kind of where it fits into my lifestyle.
Yeah, I think ultimately when it comes to healthy lifestyles and supplements, it's a lot to do with consistency and sustainability, whatever that you can maintain for a long time and therefore reap the benefits through that sort of practice, then that's what's gonna work. So Marc, I've got this interesting question for you, right? So you are the president and CEO of Beachbody, and I can't help but see that P90X. You guys also own P90X or run P90X?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no,
so
absolutely. Beachbody created that.
Guys, yeah. So I mean, that was huge when it came out. I mean, it's still huge. I mean, there's still a lot of my friends who are still working out using P90X, right? So obviously you are sort of encapsulating, both nutrition as well as fitness. So in your experience, right, your business aside, like what do you normally push for first, the nutrition or the physical activity?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I love working out. I love physical activity. I love sports. Like that's my passion. That's what really gets me going. When you think about it from an overall health standpoint, though, like even at Beachbody, we came to realization, listen, you cannot out-exercise a bad diet. Like at the end of the day, nutrition reigns supreme. And so they're all important, obviously physical fitness, nutrition, overall mental health. All of these are interconnected factors. I put nutrition at the top of that pyramid. And like we literally used to say, right? I mean, if you had a pie to split between nutrition and physical fitness, it'd be probably 75% what you're putting in your body and then 25% how you're moving your body. It's still super important. But at the end of the day, nutrition is I believe, the biggest factor in leading to an overall health and wellness, relatively speaking. And frankly, that's a big part of, during my tenure or partnered with the founders of Beachbody, clearly the business grew up focused on that fitness side of it, right? So P90X and insanity and moving your body and getting ripped and losing weight and shredded. But where we really grew and scaled the business was more in the nutrition angle, right? Realizing to really get people to the optimal health for a longer term sustainable basis, the nutrition side was so critical and important. And that's actually really where we scaled Beachbody. We became more of a nutrition company than a fitness company, even though that's how, Beachbody got famous, was P90X and insanity.
Yeah, that's great answer. And I really like the answer because if you even think about it, right, when you are dialed in on your nutrition, you're probably going to be more motivated and have more energy to do the physical activity anyway. And you have the right mindset and mental health to get into the right mindset in order to lead a healthy life. And also another thing is when you work out, let's say, even if you work out 2-3 hours a day, there is like 21 hours left in the day that you are not working out, that everything else falls into that, your sleep, your nutrition. And when you eat, it's not just the act of eating. It is, like Chris elaborated very nicely throughout the episode, it's the whole process of digestion and also signaling that goes from your gut to your brain to your hormones to your DNA level in terms of HDAC and really up and down regulating certain pathways that regulate energy generation in mitochondria. So all of that is great.
One of the things that I love about this space of overall wellness is just how interconnected all of these elements are as well. Like even nutrition, like you said, like when you are eating healthy and you feel good and confident, you're significantly more likely to want to go work out, right? And to take care of that physical aspect. And when you work out, that's releasing positive like serotonin, you're feeling great about yourself and you're confident. And so that's improving your mental. It's like incredibly all interconnected is one of the things that I just generally love about health and wellness. And we see it every day, like people that feel better and healthier, like starting to have a shake or a bar. Like, you know what? I hit the gym today because I was like, I know I'm doing good for my gut, like my inner gut. I want to do better for my outer gut, right? That's why I'm working out more. So we just see it's a lot of times it's a spark that gets to other healthy habits and behaviors. And I love to see when that happens.
Yeah, it's crazy when you realize those kind of feelings yourself and you're like, well, and I think I would recommend for people who are listening as well, if take notice of those days where you feel extraordinarily motivated and feel energetic. Think about the things that you've done that day and things that you've eaten that day. And maybe like that's what I've started doing, and to really dial in onto, okay, what actually clicks with my body and my mind and what actually affects me throughout the day from an energy point of view and from a sort of mindset point of view as well. And we can learn a lot through the biosignals of our body, or biofeedback from our bodies. All right, so as we're closing out here, for our audience who would love to find out more about you guys, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. The best place is to come to our website. It's supergut.com. Obviously, you can learn more about our products and the resistant starch prebiotic fiber. We also try to offer a fair amount of educational content right around gut health and why is it so important and how is what we're doing connected to gut health. We're also pretty active on the social media as well, across TikTok and Instagram and even Twitter these days, getting out there to raise awareness and the collective understanding about gut health and prebiotics and their role, and obviously, hopefully, drawing more consideration for SuperGut as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important as well for experts, scientists, all in this area to now be more active on social media, because a lot of the younger generation do consume social media and they get their information not from Google anymore, but from TikTok or like any form of social media. And that became the mainstream of where the information comes from. So it's so important for the right people spreading the right information to be out there.
Absolutely. Because I was going to say, and that factor is for better or for worse, it's happening. So it is really incumbent on us to know that it's happening regardless of your participation. Would really prefer more subject matter experts and people with backgrounds in the space to spread, information, accurate evidence-based information, versus otherwise it's just flooded with who knows what trend fad kind of homegrown remedy without much background and science behind it. So
yeah, sometimes I'm amazed at how confident people are with no backing, like substantial facts behind what they claim. I guess us, the experts, just have to learn how to dance while explaining science, right?
There you go.
Make it more entertaining.
But I think it's so important, it is how consumers are absorbing information, right? So
whether we like it or not, it's happening.
Exactly. So I think it's really well put to be
cool. Well, it has been a really, really amazing conversation, and I've learned a lot, and I shall Google whether hydroxybutyrate will turn into butyrate in our gut or vice versa after this. And stay tuned for more gut health and metabolic science on the H.V.M.N. podcast. Thank you for listening, and thank you guys for coming on.
Thanks so much for having us, Latt. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Latt. This was great.